Right now, with a one-year anniversary fast approaching, a new report out late this afternoon spotlights the tragedies that unfolded at Sandy Hook Elementary School. We will be live in Newtown with a report, and also tonight, many questions obviously still remain. What have we learned since that tragedy, and what, if anything, can be done to stop another Newtown from happening to our kids again? And then, PlaceYourBets.com. New Jersey turns to the web to find a new revenue stream and a new way to get people into the casinos. Is the state going too far or just hedging its bets in a changing world? And later, if corporations are people, can corporations have religious preferences and impose those on their employees? The case of Hobby Lobby versus Obamacare, it heads to the High Court. We will have a preview. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Monday evening, November 25th. It was one of those moments, one of those stories where a lot of us thought, well, this will change everything. But of course, it hasn't, and many people think it won't. December 14th, 2012, nearly a year ago, shots, as we all remember, rang out inside Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. And we all know the results. 20 first-grade students killed by a single gunman, along with 6 school staffers whose only mistake was trying to save the lives of so many kids. Now, we will get into what we have learned in a report released late this afternoon, and also get into what we haven't and what needs to be done. That in a few moments. But first, this has been another day that people of Newtown winced at as it arrived. A report by the Connecticut State Attorney General and our first official look at what actually happened at Sandy Hook, and if it's possible to know why. Fox 1's Carolyn Fortino, she is live tonight outside of Town Hall in Newtown with the details. Carolyn?
Well, good evening there, Rich. The Newtown community had been bracing themselves for what they knew would be a difficult day filled with painful memories. The day the Connecticut State Attorney's Office would release their report with minute-by-minute details of the Sandy Hook shooting. Now, after a year of investigating, what we do know is this. No one other than Adam Lanza was involved in the planning or the execution of the shooting. And at this point, police have still not been able to determine the motive behind the deadly massacre. The first 911 call about an active shooter in Sandy Hook Elementary School came into the Newtown Police Department at 9:35 a.m. 4 minutes later, police broke through the doors of the school, and less than 1 minute later, Adam Lanza took his own life with a single shot from a 10-millimeter pistol. In the first moments of the massacre, Connecticut State Police say Adam Lanza entered 2 first-grade classrooms, Classroom 8 and Classroom 10, killing 20 students using a Bushmaster rifle.
I'm getting emotional. I'm really sorry. I have to read I don't even know how I feel about it.
The report is a summary of thousands of pages of details contained in the full state police report on the massacre, which officials say could be released after the first of the year. Officials say the report will include photos, witness statements, the 911 calls, and other likely gruesome details of the tragedy. But some Newtown residents feel the information needs to be released.
Having information available is good, and people can choose to either access it or not, and that's their choice. And how they dispense it to their children is up to them. That's a parenting choice.
The police report names Lanza as someone who had serious mental health issues, obsessed with the Columbine shooting, one of the most deadly school shootings in history. But for many, the obvious question that still remains is, why did the shooter murder 27 people, including 20 children? And according to the police report, that question may never be answered.
Oh, it's very sad. You know, and it's the more I think of it, it's very heartbreaking. You know, the whole thing.
Now, also detailed in the report is the fact that a Texas woman contacted Hartford police on December 14th, the day that the shooting happened. She said that 20 hours earlier, her son had been playing a video game with someone and that he was told that there would be a shooting at the school. But it has not been confirmed whether that woman contacted the police before or after the shooting took place. In Newtown, I'm Carolyn Fortino. Rich, let's send it back to you.
Carolyn, thank you very much. And for more here, let's bring in our panel. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College and professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carr, of course, political journalist and author. Mark Furnish, professor at Brooklyn Law, an attorney who has argued before the Supreme Court. We'll be talking more about the High Court later in the program. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And guys, there were more details that came out, and it painted a really haunting picture about Adam Lanza. He basically lived a hermit lifestyle. The windows were black tape all over them. He played these games incessantly, and he disallowed anyone from being either touchy. I mean, he was obviously very deranged, and that was very clear from the portraits that came out of the reports. But as so many shootings miss signs, you know, I think time will tell if maybe dots should or shouldn't have been connected, but it doesn't change the tragedy. And Jeannie, you're an expert on poll numbers. The thing that always surprises me as we approach the one-year anniversary is very few times have I seen after an incident where there seems to be near unanimity in the public. 90% of the public. Pluralities when it came to gun owners and non-gun owners, Republicans and Democrats. Everybody agreed that something had to change, and background checks seemed to be the most attainable change, where, as I said, 90+% of Americans supported the idea. But yet it couldn't go through even after the tragedy, the pictures we saw, the white little coffins that were carried out, the heartbreaking accounts of the children's lives from their parents, the stories of heroism of the teachers, an impassioned president that went forward on this, law enforcement that supported. I can keep going. People know the narrative now, but yet nothing changed. Have you ever seen numbers so solid behind a change, but yet it doesn't lead to anything tangible?
Well, the classic case is flag burning, and that was an issue of intensity, though. So where the American public was, you know, reporting in polls that they were against flag burning, it should be outlawed, deemed unconstitutional, and yet they couldn't get that passed. And that's really the classic example of that. Although on that issue, when you looked at it closely, they lacked the intensity that something like this does. Yep. And I'm remembering back to this incident, and everybody at the time said, and we all said, we have a very narrow window of opportunity in which to pass this legislation. If it's not done in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, it's not going to happen. And that is exactly what happened. Because, of course, the way our Congress works, you have people in there who can stop legislation from going through, and their constituents don't want it to go through. So despite having enormous, you know, support among the majority of the public, you can have a small minority stop legislation.
Is there this intensity for gun control? I mean, I don't think it's a voting issue for people who want gun control nearly as much as it is for people who want to expand the Second Amendment, who want gun rights.
Yeah, and that's where the intensity, and that's another part of this, the intensity lies more on the opposite side when you look at this issue, although many people support, what we think of as smart gun legislation or reasonable gun legislation, but the intensity in terms of getting out the vote, in terms of supporting people, is on the other side.
Well, you made the point, and I think of New York as an example, an imperfect piece of legislation that may have gotten pushed through Albany, but yet the governor did it. He didn't wait. And, almost, and I know there's different political dynamics of Albany and Washington, certainly, but the big mistake was they tried to reach consensus. They looked at the very polls that I mentioned and said, the public wants this. If we all get behind it, there's no political risk or downside, so let's all craft something together. And they tried to do 4 things. Remember, they tried to do the assault weapons. They tried to do restrictions on, I think it was ammo clips. They tried to have the database. They tried to obviously do the background checks. If they try to get one thing through fast and dared anyone to stand in the window of it in the first 6 weeks, like they did in Albany, they would have had a much better shot. But that being said, Dominic, to use the example, and I think it was a good one, that flag burning is probably the last example. You see a handful of those cases every year. We have seen how many of these tragedies in the last 11 months. I mean, Andrew did the numbers, how many times? 30-something, 35,000 people have died at the other end of the gun. But we've seen it play out in movie theaters. We've seen it out in schools. We've seen it in
today, right?
Saw it at Yale today, at a college campus. We've seen it at high schools. We've seen it obviously at schools like this. We've seen it in cities, rural areas, suburban areas. Chicago, for crying out loud. In certain pockets of it, it might as well be a war zone.
It is a war zone.
But yet again, we come back and I think we'd be more surprised than not if a year from now anything really changed.
Well, I'm going to say the NRA, but let's put that aside for 1 second. What I really believe, we're talking about gun control, but I want to throw something else out there. the country is not serious about funding the battle of mental illness. It's a real problem.
So the Navy Yard,
The one common denominator in Sandy Hook, the woman that drove to the White House, remember that one?
Yep.
And, you know, her crazy antics, and the man that went to the Navy facility in Washington. We can go on and on and on. And until Washington gets serious, because the guns are always going to be there, we've got to do something to, and this is not new, Richard, funding and coming up with dollars for mental illness beds is something that's gone on for the last several decades, and nothing ever changes.
See, I agree with Dominic to a point, but then he loses me. The mental illness does need to be better treated. We need to bring it in, and we need to fund it better and all that. But the guns aren't always going to be. The guns don't have to always be there. We can come up with no. I know, and we're singing the same tune. Believe me, you know as well as I do. But the guns don't have to be there. There are ways that we can make these guns smarter. There are ways that we can crack down on gun laws.
We did learn today about the guns legally.
Right. But didn't he steal them from his mother? I mean, weren't they from his mother's cabinet?
They were legally purchased.
And then he killed his mother when this whole day started too, when the rampage started. But you know, if those guns had been smart guns, where they would only work for the mother's handprints, which is a technology that's possible, that's there. That's at least one step that we go. If he had been previously diagnosed, like Cray Deeds' son, who used the gun on himself in Virginia, or the Navy Yard guy, and we got that diagnosis there, and maybe we had a better network in place, we could have stopped those purchases from happening. There are things that can be done to reduce it and to make it less deadly.
It does seem the commonality is crazy and access leads to tragedy.
Well, I think Dom nailed it, that the underlying problem is obviously one of mental illness, but also Andrew's right. It doesn't mean that an incremental step can't be taken to reduce the prevalence of guns. It's a dual problem. Traditionally, the problem of mental illness isn't a federal concern, but interstate regulation of gun traffic is a federal concern. Theoretically, that would be the easier one to legislate through Washington, but also, Jeannie makes a great point. If you can't get a flag-burning amendment passed where there is no well-funded special interest group behind it, good luck getting gun regulation passed where there is a whole well-funded industry opposing it.
Well, as you can obviously imagine, we're going to be talking a lot more about this as that tragic anniversary approaches. And really, the tragedy is some states, few states, have put in some changes, Connecticut and New York being among them. But more states, believe it or not, have actually laxed gun rules since Newtown than before the tragedy occurred here. So there's quite a bit to talk about as we approach that year, and we'll get to it. But when we come back here, we want to come closer to home and deal with an issue that's passionate, but certainly not deadly, but deals with something that every parent struggles with, and that is taxes and schools. And when we come back, there's a proposal working its way through New York with some bipartisan support that has public school advocates up in arms and other parents saying, well, maybe it's not such a crazy idea. Would you like to decide where your tax dollars go if you choose not to send your kids to public school? We'll talk about that after this.